Hello and welcome to Alive and Composing, the wonderful world of innova with today's guest, George Hurd. Would you please state your name for the record?
My name is George Hurd.
And we do this little longitudinal analysis of composers and their household pets. Do you have one? And do they have interesting names?
Sadly, no. I've always been a lover of dogs. I've always had a dog. I grew up in Chicago, and for almost my entire life, I had dogs. And never great dogs. They always had behavioral issues, and they would turn on us every once in a while. But I always just connected with dogs and really enjoyed their company. But since I've lived in San Francisco, which has been 8 years now, I've never lived in a place that allowed animals whatsoever. So I've just been stuck in this situation. And eventually, my fiance and I, we really want to have a pet at some point, but I guess it just depends the luck of where we end up, I suppose.
I hear they have parrots in San Francisco, so you might consider
This is
one
true.
of those.
I've never been a bird guy, unfortunately. The idea of it just always bothered me. Caging a bird just seemed like the least logical thing that you could possibly do, and just torturous for this animal, and so I could never do it. But yeah, one day we'll see.
Maybe we can cage music, as it were.
There we go.
Yeah. What's your first sound memory? Cast your mind back.
This is funny that you say that, because this just came up recently in a conversation, and somebody had asked me that question, and I didn't grow up in a musical household at all. My father and mother both loved music on various levels, and when I look back, I think of my father listening to a very wide variety of music. Everything from opera to blues that you could think of, he was a fan of, but there was not very much there was no music being played, first of all. But it just wasn't a very nurturing environment as far as being a musician. But yeah, somebody asked me this, and I kind of was really digging, and I realized that my first musical memory was my father had gotten an upright piano when I was very, very young. And my two older sisters, they had taken lessons, and unsuccessfully. So they decided that they didn't want to play it anymore, so this thing just was sitting in the corner. And for years, nobody touched it. Nobody was interested in it, and eventually, he tried to sell it. Nobody wanted to buy it. He tried to give it away. Nobody would take an upright piano. So we thought about it, and he's like, "Well, we can't have this thing. Nobody wants it. It's been here for many years. I'm going to destroy it." So I think I was probably, 5 or 6 maybe at the time, and he gave me a hammer, and he was like, "Let's do this." And so we just took to this thing and just smashed it to pieces. And the sound of it to this day is still in my head. It's just just absolute insanity coming out of this thing. And there's something kind of tragic in it, as much as it's exhilarating. But that is the closest thing I can come to.
A very Fluxus-inspired memory.
Yeah, I think so.
And if you hadn't turned out to be a musician, what might you have been, or what are you?
Well, I am a musician, composer professionally. And I've thought about this a number of times too, because there are many people I know in my life who, at my age, are still trying to figure out what to do next. And I've always been very blessed that there was this singular thing that I was compelled to do. Then I've always felt, this is what I'm good at. Everything else that I do is secondary. However, whenever there's even a little bit of quiet time in my life, I found myself drawn to refinishing old furniture, like working with my hands. I'm an avid cyclist, and I like working on bikes too. And there's something about just being on my feet, working with my hands, like the antithesis of composing almost, where it's very meditative in a way, where you just kind of lose yourself in this task, and you're just alone with your thoughts. I've always been quite taken with that. I still harbor some sort of fantasy of eventually retiring to the Austrian Alps with my soon-to-be wife, and just making furniture.
It seems like you're compensating for that piano incident.
Maybe. I'll make it right one day.
And because we're trying to get very elliptically at your creative life here and your music, It strikes me that there may be parallels between furniture finishing, furniture making, crafting something very elegant and beautiful, and how you put sounds together.
I absolutely believe so. I think there's something in composer's personality often that is drawn to the meticulous and the detailed. Some, you might say, are control freaks, and I would be guilty of that on some level, but just the desire to get in there and work with all the details and fine-tune every little thing and make it as perfect as you possibly can. It never will be, and you have to abandon that idea to a certain extent, I think, to be healthy. But in general, yeah, I'm very drawn to the details and get everything worked out just so.
Mm-hmm. And particularly with a relationship to furniture or architecture or something very kind of symmetrical and functional. When I listen to your music, I think of that. If you'd said that you were into brewing beer, I would have thought maybe, organic soundscapes.
There you go.
Were there other... Can you name a moment in your life when witnessing a work of art really changed it? You said, that's what I've got to do for the rest of my life. That just blew me away. And it could be a poem, a painting, piece of music for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I'd have to say there were a handful of moments musically that really set things in stone. That kind of, every once in a while, almost every musician I know has that moment where you hear a piece of music and it just changes everything from that point on. And I think one of the earliest ones was the first time that I heard, or I should say really listened to Beethoven piano sonatas. When I must have been 12 or 13. I remember getting my hands on a handful of, like Naxos CDs of just like almost the entire Beethoven sonata collection. And I got them just because I was like, oh, that'd be nice to listen to. And, I put them on and it just struck a chord. There was something just so powerful and something so clear about the writing that it just, it opened my mind up to the possibilities of music. Rather than up until that point, it had been a lot more about things like rock in general. Listening to what a lot of people were listening to. And that was the first time where I felt like fully that my choice, my choice in what to listen to was my own. And suddenly that was the moment where I kind of stopped listening to all the outside noise musically in the world. And suddenly I felt like I found the thing that I was supposed to be listening to. And so that really directed me on that course and got me deeply involved in classical music. But fast forward a few more years, and I was a freshman in high school, and a friend of mine, actually it was my sister's friend who was 3 years older than me, so he was a senior and much cooler and very artistic guy, and he played me a recording of Aphex Twin. And that just, 10 times more than with the Beethoven. It was this like a punch in the chest. What is this? I've never heard anything like this in my life. And there was just something, the intricacy of it and just how wild it was. There was just almost this violent quality to it. There was, despite being incredibly mechanical, it was extremely expressive. And especially for a young person that's just boiling over with emotions and hormones and everything, there was something that spoke to me where it wasn't angry, but there was something in it that was ready to explode or was already exploding. And more than anything, it was just that sound exploration where I heard sounds I'd never heard before, never imagined I could hear before, and it just blew my world up a little bit.
And I can even relate Beethoven plus Aphex Twin is not a million miles away from your work with acoustic chamber ensembles and electronics. Am I right?
Absolutely. It's really kind of wonderful to see how things kind of took place in the past and just set the course for what's going to happen later on. And there's been many, many, many different influences that have come in and things that have happened in my life that have changed my influences, but those are still, at their core, two of my favorite things in the world to listen to. It was never a moment where I thought, okay, what I have to do is combine these acoustic instruments, and it never worked out that way. I remember just kind of it gradually started to come together. I was composing for a group on the side that I was playing in, and I was writing solo electronic music, and just the two it was every day they kind of got closer and closer, and one day I was like, oh, let's try this, and before you knew it, they were just blending deeper and deeper, and I still write, purely electronic and purely acoustic music, but I'm always drawn to the combination of the two. It's kind of the perfect mixture for me.
Did you do formal studies in music and composition? Did you have mentors? How did you get?
Actually, no. I've always studied music on my own, and I did not go to school for music. I went to school for writing, and I actually used to write travel guides for a few years after I got out of school. But it was a scenario where, halfway through my college education, I realized, this is not professionally what I should be doing. But I was already so far on this path, and I always have loved writing. And it was, for me, it had kind of made sense up until that point. And so I finished my degree, but I would spend most of my time in the music library, like between every class, and I'd be reading scores, and I would just, music overtook my life in a big way well before my studies were over. But yeah, I am self-taught and always have been. And as far as mentors, I don't know if there's anybody who I would even call a mentor. Maybe that's part of the plight of being like a solo electronic musician, especially in Chicago where there was not a lot of that going on at the time. It was just solitary. You were just kind of on your own and in this sonic world that you created, completely by yourself. And I think there's kind of a beauty to it at the time, but after moving to the Bay Area and getting involved in a community and a musical community, and more people who are doing more related things to what I was doing, you start to realize the virtues of being involved with others as well.
And you have other skills when you move to the Bay Area. It looks like you're like the digital personal assistant to other composers and performers. Mm. And does that give you like a network to work with? Does that employ skills that kind of are mutually beneficial to your clients?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's been a really great thing that I was very fortunate when I got here to get involved with people like Carla Kilstead and Mason Bates, and Mark Orton, and I still work with all of them to this day, and I'm very close friends with all of them. But yeah, there was something to be said for, I think, being involved in just digital communication with them and PR, promotion, social media, like all the things. Working with them taught me about the business of music in a very big way, and you couldn't find better people to learn from, by the way. But what I also liked was the fact that they were spread out in substantially different genres. All the people that I was working with were, like very experimental avant-garde new music with Carla Kilstead, and rock too. And she's kind of a chameleon musically. But Mason being a strict classical composer, who's also an electroacoustic composer, which was the reason why we became friends. And then Mark with his amazing compositions, but then his film music and all that. So at the same time, I was able to get this multi-pronged education that has helped me out tremendously.
And you also created and manage your own Hurd ensemble.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
Does that give you extra control over things in your music that you wouldn't otherwise have? Or is it just fun?
Absolutely. I think, it started off as a necessity. I moved to the Bay Area and I didn't know anybody here, really, not musicians at least. So I got here and I was like, okay, well, I just need to start a group from scratch. I had just come off, I had scored a film in Chicago. Actually, I got the gig in Chicago and I scored it in San Francisco. But I basically moved here and flew back almost immediately to record it. But I had come off of this and I had formed this particular group. It was for a film called Freeing Bernie Barron. It was a documentary. This particular combination of musicians that I chose, or instruments that I chose, just felt perfect to me. And it was violin, viola, bass, vibraphone, harp, and piano. And right away, there was just something perfect about it. So when I got to San Francisco, I was like, I really enjoyed writing for that combination. I'm going to try to put together a group of that same instrumentation, but with electronics. And I had been, working on a few different pieces, and so I just I started contacting musicians just randomly, and they started referring other people, and just built up this core group of musicians that, for the most part, is still with me today. They become very close friends of mine. But the beauty of that is it can be, not only more collaborative, because you trust these people very well, and they know my style, and I know their abilities. But there's also something there. It's just nice to have the ability that I can show up to a rehearsal and we can toss everything out if we want. We can reconfigure things. they're very open-minded to the process, and again, I trust them with what they're going to do with my music. But yeah, the control that I have over the music is, fairly complete. As long as it's physically possible, then we can do it. But I've enjoyed it a great deal.
And now you're going to combine your travel instinct with your ensemble and your music. You're taking over the globe, is that right?
That's what I hope. Yeah, we have things are still up in the air, so I don't want to stress it too much. But yeah, we're going to be doing our East Coast tour and the Kennedy Center and playing in New York, and then we're going to hopefully we'll see. This is one of the nice things is that my fiance is she's German. So I've spent a great deal of time traveling throughout Europe and beyond with her. We just got back we spent 3 months traveling around Europe this summer, and I was working on a music project based on site-specific sound sources that I was using. And it really just opened us up to some amazing places we hadn't considered before that I feel compelled to return to and perform. Portugal, and Lisbon in particular, is just an amazing place. And the people there have just wide open ears and very open hearts and very, very receptive to new ideas. And there were just a lot of places like that I kept hearing from people, you need to come back, you need to come perform. And so yeah, we're in the process of setting up some substantial touring, which I'm excited about.
And now we're inching towards your innova release, Navigation Without Numbers. And navigation still relating to your Wanderlust. You wrote a piece for Carla Gilstedt, the violinist. When you approach working with a virtuoso of any kind, how does that influence what you write? Do you write it for their talent? Do you write it to stretch what they can't do yet?
That's an interesting idea because with Carla, I'm so familiar with her style. And I've heard, I think, every piece that a person has written for her. And there are certain things that Carla does that everybody throws into their pieces that I was dead set on avoiding. Because I'm like, and she does it so well, and there are just particular ideas that I just noticed pop up, and I was like, I don't want to write that same piece. That's just a Carla piece. But I also know she can play literally anything I throw at her. So actually, where the influence came was less in testing her abilities, because that would be very difficult. I'm not particularly interested in writing difficult music just to write difficult music. If the piece turns out to be technically difficult, that's fine. But if anything, I've been trying to write more simply as I get older. But with Carla, what I strove to do was to take more of the influence of the music she has created and use that. There were certain things that she had said to me over the years about how she played with this particular group and had suggestions like, why don't you play the violin more of a percussive instrument, and why don't you, there were a lot of different ideas that came up, and things that she had noted to me were moments that kind of opened her head up and like, I should try this, and that dictated her style with that group for a while. And so I was very much aware of all that, and so I kind of took that into account. And hell, some of the stuff that I wrote in her living room, like before we were going to record, and so it was very much about her on a lot of levels. But I wouldn't say that I tried to test her, and I would be amazed to see what that would turn out to be like. It would just be the most technical pain in the ass you could possibly imagine. She's a wild musician, and I've yet to see her hit her limit just yet.
When you combine electronics with acoustic instruments, what's the nature of that interface? Are you doing live processing? Is it just a backing track? Is it sequenced? Do you take pre-recorded sounds? Is it the equivalent of ensemble plus tape?
No, it's so basically the way that I tend to work is traveling is a huge part of my life, and always has been. That's really just like all of my extra time and money tends to go towards traveling, so throughout those travels, and even when I'm not traveling, but especially when I am, I just try to engage the sonic environment, and I try to get as many things recorded that are, not only specific to a location, but specific to my experience, things that are personal to me, anything that sounds interesting, honestly. But I've kind of gone through this record in particular. is really a collection of almost all the sounds that I've taken in over the past 15 years. They go back as far as, I was a teenager and I was, had like a Sony handheld tape recorder. And I remember the first sound that I recorded was the sound of, it had rained the night before, and there was, in my parents' backyard, there was a garbage can filled with water. And I remember seeing it, and it was metal, and just kicking it across the pavement, and just the otherworldly roar that came out of this thing, and just like the way the pitches were changing as the water sloshed out, and the scraping of the metal across the concrete. And I remember recording it and being amazed with it, but having absolutely no idea what to do with it musically, because at the time I didn't have a computer that could do any of this. I didn't own a sampler. But I knew, I'm like, one day I'm going to use this. And I did eventually. But the process was kind of, it took a little while to piece together how it would work with a live group. But what I do now is essentially, a lot of it is, I compose the pieces of music with sequencers and things like that. But there is a substantial amount of live processing, of not really rearranging, because it's all composed and set in stone for the musicians. There are certain sections where it'll have a repeat that will go on until indicated, so that till we go on to the next section. But for the most part, it's me manipulating the electronics in a variety of ways, but within a particular structure that the musicians can follow along with, without there being any issues. Because the biggest problem with having syncing, because the music is extremely rhythmic, this hyper-rhythmic type of music, and very involved and intricate in the way that the musicians play with each other and interact with the electronics. I've often described it like a zipper coming together, where everything kind of fits very tightly together, and has to in order to function. So if they were to, miss a bar or even a beat, everything goes to hell. So, we've had to learn how to be very tight with each other, and adhere to certain structures that are, either agreed upon beforehand or are, that I lead them through in a very clear way. But yeah, it's really more than anything, it's about the interaction of the sound with the acoustic instruments, is working with a synthetic landscape, regardless of the organic origins that the sounds might come from. They ultimately it's a digital medium that I'm dealing with. So to have those interact with the acoustic instruments that's the most important thing, that there is an overall organic sound that I'm creating where everything can blend and meld together. So it's not just, some synth bass line going while there's violin, chords being played over the top. It's much more about a full integration of the two elements together, in the most natural way possible.
The result is really beautiful. We love listening to it. Thank you for telling us about your navigation.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.